Good evening. Whether compromise or fatally compromised, only the future can tell us. Our fifth story on the countdown tonight, breaking news. Lawmakers in the Senate this evening reaching a tentative deal on a stimulus bill with a $780 billion price tag. The compromise, 42% tax cuts. Very little use to what we learned today were 600,000 more Americans who had their jobs cut last month, the worst month in a third of a century. The president warning today that any further foot dragging on the rescue package would be catastrophic, saying it is inexcusable and irresponsible for Congress to get bogged down in distraction and delay while millions of Americans are being put out of work. The clock ticking today as senators met behind the closed door of the Democratic leader, where a bipartisan group of moderates discussed ways to cut $100 billion or more from the measure, which had reached $940 billion. Meanwhile, new amendments kept coming to the point that at one point this afternoon, Senator Max Baucus, the chairman of the Finance Committee, pleads with his colleagues, no more amendments. Democratic leader Reid tonight discussing the tentative deal with his members, hoping all of them will support what will be a tough sell among some more liberal Democrats, possibly troubled that nearly half of the measure is now tax cuts. Last night, addressing the House Democratic Caucus at the start of its annual Issues Conference at Williamsburg, Virginia, the president reminding his audience that his Republican critics, now complaining about the cost of the rescue package when the nation's got a huge deficit, were the ones who created the deficit.
First of all, I found this deficit when I showed up. Number one. I found this national debt doubled, wrapped in a big bow waiting for me as I stepped into the Oval Office.
The president, in a speech reminiscent of some of his best efforts on the stump during the 2008 election, saying it is time to turn things around.
I don't care whether you're driving a hybrid or an SUV. If you're headed for a cliff, you've got to change direction. That's what the American people called for in November, and that's what we intend to deliver.
Mr. Obama also eviscerating the main Republican talking point against a rescue package.
Then you get the argument, well, this is not a stimulus bill, this is a spending bill. What do you think a stimulus is? That's the whole point. No, seriously. That's the point.
This morning on the floor of the Senate, Republican Senator John McCain, also having traveled in the Wayback Machine to the 2008 presidential election, firing back at his now non-opponent.
The whole point, Mr. President, is to enact tax cuts and spending measures that truly stimulate the economy.
Except that less than 3 minutes before that, Mr. McCain had blasted the tax cuts in the stim as ineffective.
Mr. President, the American people are figuring it out, that this is not a stimulus bill. It is a spending bill full of unnecessary spending and, of course, tax cuts which really do not stimulate the economy.
Okay. Minutes ago on the floor of the Senate, moderate Republican Susan Collins of Maine explaining why she believes what is essentially her compromise on this is a huge improvement over the rescue package passed in the House.
It was a Christmas tree upon which every member, virtually, had hung his or her favorite project. It was bloated, expensive, and ineffective. This compromise greatly improves the bill.
Time now to call in our own political analyst, Richard Wolffe. Good evening, Richard.
Good evening, Keith.
All right. Obviously, the moderates, the Democratic moderates, made this deal. Sherry Brown was quoted about this before, and several others. What about the other Democrats? Are they going to go along with this?
Yeah, I think they are. Look, everyone's feeling the same pressure here, and the pressure comes not slightly here from the economic numbers, which we just saw today, those terrible unemployment numbers. Nobody wants to go out there and face their own members in their districts or in their states and saying that they didn't do something when the president was saying it had to be done. So, yeah, people are going to get on board. They're going to be unhappy. Yes, it's rushed. No, not every piece of spending is going to be in there. But in the end, the economic pressure, the political pressure from from this president is just going to be too great. And that was always the case with this bill. This was all symbolic from the beginning, but now it's coming to a head.
Some Republicans said, to the point of it being rushed, that they thought it was ludicrous that once the compromise had been reached, that a vote was to be taken within a matter of hours. Are they going to vote tonight? They're going to wait over the weekend? What do we think is going to happen logistically?
Well, it does look like the latest information is that they want to read things a little more slowly. It does, maybe they're not the fastest readers here, but they want to wait until Sunday. And there's a piece of politics in there, too. Harry Reid doesn't want to have to force this to a vote because things have been rushed so far and people are feeling slighted in some way. These are senators. They think they're members of the world's greatest deliberative body. So give them an extra day or two and things will be happier.
And Senator Kennedy, who has not been back at work since he collapsed at the Capitol luncheon on the day of the inauguration, is he, in fact, as rumored, going to be coming back to vote on this, and how critical is his vote to it?
Well, every vote is critical, and I think he has a track record of making the dramatic gesture. This is certainly one of those times when it may be called for. You hesitate to say that anything is worth disturbing someone in his position, but every vote really does count. And remember, without the Minnesota race being resolved as well, and Al Franken being seated, you know, every vote really does count. Having said that, there do seem to be enough senators making this compromise, Democrats and Republicans here, that they will have enough votes. But again, Senator Kennedy made those dramatic gestures before. He was there in the convention. So I think he might just be able to make it for this.
Richard, as a sort of subtext to this, what was Senator McCain doing? It looked like he was still, in fact, fighting the last, the second week of November part of the election campaign last year. What was that all about?
Well, he doesn't seem to have gained any clarity in his economic argument since the election, but the Republican Party is showing that it still has some life in it, and there is a vacuum there, a leadership vacuum. As the last person to nominally lead the party, he is an important voice. So I think he was sort of showing that he is still an important player. He still does have a base, but in the end, they're going to lose. They're going to lose this because the White House will get what it wants. They are shuffling around some of the proportions of tax cuts to everything else, but you know, the spending that they cut out here, they're going to have to return to because the bulk of it is for states, and there are Republican governors out there, Republican governors who supported John McCain, who are going to come back and say, we cannot meet our commitments, give us more money. And that concept of the tax cuts of it constituting 42% of this whole deal, are the Republicans going to trot out with that as a victory over President Obama, or is there something fallacious in that argument? Well, it is much easier for them to oppose various piecemeal items of spending. In the end, they're going to have to decide whether they say, we voted against it, we opposed it all along, or they're going to say, we made it better. They cannot have it both ways. And the messaging piece of this is going to be much harder for Republicans coming out of it because, again, nobody wants to say they got in the way of creating jobs. All right, we'll monitor this, and we'll pick up the thread if, for some reason, there turns out to be a vote tonight, or if we know officially there is not. But for now, MSNBC political analyst Richard Wolffe, a great thanks. Have a good weekend if we don't talk again. Thank you, Keith.